Morning. Hi.
Morning, Margaret. How are you?
Uh, Not too bad. I'm just experiencing some. Why did I go there? Why did I go? I had to run back to my room, and I stood there for at least 50 seconds. Just think, what am I doing here? So, and that, of course, is leading into exactly what we thought we might talk about today, which is why are we here? Why are we on this planet? Why are we, there's got to be something more. And I know I remember the time when I got to that point in my life. I think I was probably in my 30s, a young mum, kind of just overwhelmed with children and work and life, and thinking, what am I doing here? Why am I, what are we meant to learn from all of this? So now at the backside of all of that, I'm starting to put together my ideas of why we're here. So we thought it would be a really good idea to have a chat about that, because I think a lot of people think about that. So, two tarts on a journey, chatting and having a conversation about why we're here. Good morning,
Excellent.
Liz.
Well, why don't you start by, I don't know, maybe your idea of why we're here and when did it's a bit, we can question why we're here, but when did you start to get the bigger picture? When did that really start to come through of who we truly are and what we really are doing here? So, what's your take on
Yeah,
that?
I'm just trying to think of I think probably when I started really studying metaphysics, and by that time I'd moved from New Zealand to Australia, and I'd met an extraordinary woman who really started me off on my spiritual journey, um, and shaped the way that I look at my counselling practice. So um, yeah, so it was when, and I was already doing meditation, but there was nothing deeper. There was nothing deeper than I can find so much time in my day to sit in peace, and I'll call that meditation, and as quiet as possible, and I'll call that meditation. So that was when I really began to explore a little bit deeper, because I started then um, really, really challenging why certain things weren't functioning as well as they could in my life. And this is where this wonderful woman came in who I'll tell this story. Um, I was talking to her, and she, as I said, was an American who was studying metaphysics. So when I was talking to her, I was on the telephone to her, and I said, "Oh, could you just speak a little louder?" And she said, "Of course I can," but she said, "What's happening?" And I said, "Well, the funny thing is that when I'm communicating with somebody, conversing with somebody, there's times when I'm just there's patches of words that I don't hear." And that's all she needed, was that little opening. So she said, "Well, did you know that we create the perfect amount of energy every day so that we can function optimally?" And I said, "All right, yes." And then she said, "So if there's one part of our life on a physical level that isn't functioning optimally. And she said, obviously your brain isn't functioning optimally. She said that means that on the premise that we create the perfect amount of energy, then that energy's got to be going somewhere. So there must be part of your so that part of your energy is being stolen, so it can be utilized in another area. And I'm going, okay, all right, that's really interesting. And then she said, and the interesting thing is that shows us that it gives us an opportunity to see why that area isn't functioning optimally. So I'm going, okay. And she goes, and normally it shines a light on the fact that we're blocking out some painful part of our childhood that we don't want to see. And so that's often what it's covering up. And as soon as she said that, I could feel myself in resistance, bracing, and because I was a counselor. So, well, no one's going to tell me that I don't know, that I haven't checked out, everything that I need in order to function properly. So I just said, okay, oh, that's lovely, thank you. Okay, have to go now. And hung up. I could feel my whole body was going, yeah, yes. But I didn't want to acknowledge that because there was pride, there was everything else involved. So I hung up, and I was busy running around doing all sorts of things, so I didn't have to take any notice of what she had said. And about 3 days later, she rang me and she said, oh, I hadn't heard from you, so I just thought I'd call you and make sure that I hadn't done something to upset you. And in that interim, I'd been sitting outside. And at that time we lived way out in the country. So I was sitting outside on the septic tank, and I was kind of just going, why am I feeling like this? What do I need? And I turned around, and my father had died probably 16 years earlier. And I kind of looked around and I saw an image of my dad sitting around on the other side of the septic tank. And he had his old green cardigan on, and he had his pipe in his hand. And anyway, and he was just nodding to me, and everything flooded to me then. And it was like, okay, he's giving you permission to, and encouraging you to look back at the way he treated you and what he made you believe and what he made you hide about yourself. So that began my whole journey, and I realized that there was so much more to being here than I had done, which was survival and bringing up the children and just going through the mechanics of physical life. So that began just an absolutely incredible journey that was, as I said, in my 30s, and that has brought me through this amazing journey that I've been on, the ups and downs and the challenges, to now, to my ability to have a look. And we'll talk later about my my perception of why we are here, which encompasses one hang of a lot more than looking at my past and growing from that. to me, it's just an infinite world of knowledge that we start diving into. So, okay, so now tell me your story.
So just a question. So do you think that when your father sat there and gave you the nod to go ahead and look more deeply into, um, you know, our experiences and that, do you think the part of looking at the experiences and the hurt made you realize that perhaps they were teaching us something or they were there for a purpose? Was that the trigger to think that there was something more to what we were doing? The fact that I've gone through this for so long, there must be a purpose for me doing it. Was that sort of like
Yes,
a
yes.
trigger to,
Later on, I
okay.
did that. But right in that point, I was so in awe because I do have what they call mind blindness. And so I don't visualize anything. I can't, right from a child. And that contributed massively to a lot of my self-worth issues. This fact that when I was 5 years old, I sat in my classroom and our teacher, who was Mrs. Langman, she told us we were learning how to spell the word "the." And so she spelt it out, she wrote it out, and then she said, now close your eyes and see it. And I couldn't see it. And immediately it was like, oh my God. So, and I would squeeze my eyes. And from then on, every time we were told to visualize something or think about something, it wouldn't happen. And the load. So yeah. So now I've lost my thread. I've lost my thread about what I was saying, but yeah. So it was those sorts of things that I explored first. But I did know. So when I saw the image of my father, which was so clear, I then went on to have another image, which was of a beautiful old house. And it was like a mud brick home. It was beautiful, and it had a big veranda on the outside, and it was not a closed-in veranda. It had a solid kind of wall around it, and it was all of mud brick. And there obviously must have been a reason, and I would have thought about it, why this house was mud brick. It was just beautiful. And I was looking in the window from the veranda, and it was twilight because it was light inside. And when I looked inside, my mother was inside, and it was my mother inside, and I can't remember who else, but they were all, chatting, and that kind of didn't feel significant. But when I turned around and I watched coming up the steps of this veranda, I saw this woman, the American woman. And she had this beautiful, great big silver coffee pot, which was huge. And she brought it in, and it was full, of coffee. And she put it on the little table out in the veranda. And drips of coffee were starting to leak, to come out of the little tap. And I just knew that she was ready to teach, that I was ready to learn, and I knew I could. It was so profound, that when this woman did approach me and say, "Have I done anything to upset you?" I just said, there's so much come to me, and I'm so ready to learn, and I know that you're going to teach me because I've seen a great big silver urn of coffee." So I said, "Can we go out to coffee?" Which we did. And, every single week we would go out and sit at a coffee shop. We lived out in the country then, at a little coffee shop, and she would teach me. And at the same time, I was studying as well. So then I started studying, and just opened a whole new window um, into the life of metaphysics and physics, and um, just a whole new way of learning, I think,
Mm.
growing. So yeah, so then I could feel this bottomless font of knowledge that was opening to me.
Mm.
Long story short.
All good. Yeah, I think for me, like I'm probably like many people, just have been going through life, just doing life, I think, trying to
Yeah,
survive.
yeah,
As even as a young child, I never felt like I belonged, and I just didn't feel um like, I don't know, I just didn't feel a connection to anything really. And because I didn't have the ability, because my understanding is now we come in with this veil to remember who we are. And I mean, because so much had been shut down from my experiences, I didn't really understand. But I do recall just searching, just having this feeling of not belonging and going through many experiences, but searching for something else.
yeah,
And no one could answer my questions. And then I think I went through a stage doing Bible studies, not because of religion, but just looking for an answer of something. And I think I closed down for a long time. But saying that, there's always been an awareness, because I've even though I was a nurse in my 20s, I always did energy healing. So I think I've always had an understanding that we were energy, but probably not putting the dots together.
yeah.
Even 20 plus years ago, reading Bruce Lipton's molecular
Mm,
biology and coming across many of those things, searching, but not understanding what I was searching for.
yeah,
So, I think just trying to navigate and understand. And I think for me, even though I've had this not feeling of belonging or connection, I think it's only really been more in recent years that the dots, or my awareness, or what's flooded to me, has been able to show me that we aren't these bodies. But it's taken a long time to understand that we're here. I think many of us get caught up in life. We're mums, we're doing this, and we're just going so fast. And I think at some point you just sit back absolutely exhausted and saying, there's got to be more to this. I couldn't possibly have just come back to just do this, and to think that I'm just this body. Why would you bother coming back to do all this hardship if there wasn't a reason for it? And I think now I sort of, started to understand that more, and then, bit like you, just gone further and further and further. And because I opened up to the awareness and just this knowing that there was something more, I think I've had the ability to see that we aren't these bodies. But that's probably, a conversation down the track. But I think just having the awareness that we aren't just these bodies coming down to work all our life, to pay taxes, to do all these things that we've been doing through hardship, and
mm,
to keep,
mm,
working, 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 working. I think, just having the ability now to see that that wasn't the purpose. It was to really come back to our own empowerment, to know who we are. But
yeah,
that's taken a little bit of time to grasp that. Well, maybe not. It's happened all very quickly, but perhaps I've always had that awareness
yeah,
that, there's it just didn't feel, it's hard to put into words. It just didn't feel like this is what it was.
yeah. And I think too that when you talked about feeling as if you didn't belong, um, I think so many of us felt like that. It's
Mm,
just with a square peg in a round hole. Yeah, where do I fit? And I've always felt that too. And you talking about taking yourself off to Bible studies. From the time I was old enough to do things myself, which I think was about um, probably 7 or 8, and I had a little friend who lived a couple of doors away from me, and we would take ourselves to church. And, I took myself to church nearly all of my childhood, just by myself. Sometimes I'd go with my mother, but most of the time I'd go by myself. I could feel it was really interesting what I experienced in there. I knew that there was something that was perhaps bigger than me, but when I listened to the words, it I could feel the hypocrisy, and I watched what people were doing, and nothing seemed to gel. And yet, I knew with all of my heart that there was a bigger power somewhere, and I think that I've always clung to that. No matter what I went through, I've always clung to that, and now, of course, I live my life by that. But yeah, just so it's just so interesting how we actually come to this.
It's interesting that you mentioned the church, because even when you were saying that, it's interesting what we block out or we forget. And I took off to Bible studies, but I remember the people that lived beside me were Catholics, and I never went to church because my parents weren't religious. But it was always, I'd go off and sit in the church with them, and I'd then I think there was other different churches I went to, but I just realized it wasn't because I believed. I actually had a wonderful awareness that it was all, to me, my perspective, and it was all hypocrisy, and it didn't make sense or anything like that. But it was the sense of belonging that I was trying to find. I was trying to fit in it. Just when you were talking then, it was like, it's so strong. I was just trying to find somewhere to fit, even though it didn't resonate with me, but it was
Yeah.
like I can feel it. I was just sitting on the pew, but I had people around me. Like
Mm.
I wasn't connected to them, but
Yeah.
I was like accepted maybe, or I felt somewhere for those moments, but it wasn't about that. So yeah, that I don't
Mm.
think I'd felt that before. So that was really
Yeah, but
interesting.
yeah. And that's really interesting that you would say that, because I would go and I felt so at one in there, but I felt so isolated
Yeah,
and disconnected from everyone that was in there.
yeah, yeah,
So even, whether it was the minister or the pre my father was brought up a Catholic, and my mother was High Church of England. So, so they came together, and there was all sorts of ructions over that. So my father, after he had a run-in with a priest, um, who wanted them to marry again, because they married during the war, blah blah blah. So yeah, my father just said he would never go inside of a Catholic church again. So my mother then took over our religious upbringing, which was, I mean, she must have been exhausted. It was, um, so yeah, she would occasionally go, but I'd religiously go. And I knew it wasn't the religion. And right from a little girl, I knew it wasn't the religion. I knew it wasn't the community, because I just felt it didn't matter where I went ever. I never felt as if I fitted in, you know? So it's just really interesting.
yeah. And I think sometimes, it's interesting. I haven't thought of that stuff for a long time, but even sitting there, I don't think I've been. I haven't been to a church service, I don't think, since my late teens, because I think perhaps some of the sermons, I was just thinking, had an impact because my life was anything. And I'm not saying we've all got trauma, but for me, it was very traumatized from my own belief systems and programming, and not sitting in. And I remember at one particular time of going through this intense time, stepping out and going, now, if that was a God,
Mm,
if that was the God that they're saying is God, I don't want to know God, because I don't believe God would bring such hardship onto
yeah,
someone. And that's when there was a total disconnect. But I don't think from the body as such, we're thinking now, it wasn't a disconnect from the above, because I'd still sit outside looking at the stars and seeing that there was so much more. But I think it was the teachings, but not recognizing that
Yes.
until then,
Yeah.
that it
Yeah.
was like, I don't want a part of this if this is what they're saying he
Yeah.
does, you know. Yeah. So I haven't actually been in one from a service, but saying that about the churches, you know, being all around the world and being drawn to churches, you can go into some of these places. They're absolutely magnificent with the stained glass and the old thing, not the makeups that they've done over time, but I'm talking about the really old ones with these
Yes.
beautiful things. And you can just sit there and just feel at one, this
Yeah.
absolute peace, which is not what I believe I feel when I would walk
Yeah.
into some of these others. So it's
Yeah.
interesting, you know, until talking about this, I didn't realize that it probably did have a impact, but not in the way that I thought it had, but more to maybe questioning them. But I shut down at a very early, even in the
Yeah.
teens, I shut down, and it's really only been this great awareness, but through my own questioning as I've
Yeah.
got older. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's so interesting. It just goes back, I think, to the church. You know, I know we've gone off a bit subject here, but the church having such a hold over our thoughts, beliefs, and connection that you don't realize, yeah, you know, you can sit back, go hypocrite or that, but you know, it really, really has shaped such dysfunctional
Oh,
community for so very long, and more such a
yeah.
disconnection with self, you know, the self-blame and the self-worthlessness because I said the wrong thing, did the wrong thing, didn't go to church, didn't obey the man. You
Yeah.
know, that all comes back to the conversations we've been having, even on our self-worth, especially as a woman. You know,
Definitely.
it you
Definitely.
know,
And
and
it's still, yeah, sorry. Yeah,
yeah,
it still impacts us, even if we have disconnected from the religion or whatever else. It still is so deeply embedded culturally, you know, in our traditions, that it's very, very difficult not to be influenced in some way, somewhere, you know, about who we are being. It's still kind of defined, I believe, still defined by those early teachings. So,
absolutely. But I think, you know, if we, you know, people say spirituality, they put spirituality and religion
yeah,
in the
no,
similar thing. But if you actually didn't use the word spirituality, and I know that I use in my own business, and you said it is the
mm,
metaphysical, and I think that if we can start to question, but bring the science in, there is so much science out there
yes,
with the spiritual aspect.
mm,
That's where your world begins to open up, because you're not defined in the one aspect of what we think we are. You know, there's so much science out there, whether you bring the Greg Bradens or the Bruce Liptons or
yeah,
the hundreds of other people. You know, there is so much proof out there that there is so much more, but bringing science and the spirituality to the metaphysical aspect, and that's where you start to question. And I think until you start to bring the science in or step out of that old paradigm and go, oh, that's, I think, for my own journey, that's probably where I have started questioning, because there's just so much that brings the so much more in to.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too, as you're talking about Bruce Lipton, I mean, he is a key. I think he is a key to um, understanding our human belief system and how much that is impacted. But I remember when I moved back to the Gold Coast, and I first started working in a clinic, and I was very kindly told, you know, not to advertise myself as spiritual, because it would really put so many people off. And that was fine in those days. It was a long time ago. In those days, it was like, oh, okay, all right. I didn't like doing that, but so I didn't advertise myself at all, because I didn't want to take that aspect out. But the interesting thing is, the same beautiful man that suggested that to me because he'd been in business and natural medicine for a long time before I was. He came to me with a little tape. Those are in the days of the tape. And he goes, I thought you might be interested in this because I was working with belief systems back then, and the fact that we do, that we create our reality, which was pretty, it was pretty out on a limb in those days.
And
Uh,
it still is. It still
yeah,
is
I
to grasp
guess.
that.
I
Yeah.
guess, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. So he bought me one of his first lectures, Bruce Lipton's first lectures on that he based the biology of belief on.
Yeah.
And I listened to this and I was just like, oh, thank you, thank you. It just confirmed everything that I was teaching and working with. And then years and years later, probably about 25 years later, I actually had the privilege to meet Bruce Lipton. And it
Wow.
was so beautiful because I just said to him, thank you. I just want to thank you because I don't think I could have survived, especially when I was being challenged by psychologists and also, um, about how I was working with people, and it was just this man and his proof of how the cells worked in the body to create these beliefs. It was just like, yes. So yeah, I was so grateful to this man, and to this day, I am still so grateful for his teaching.
Yeah, and they have been there. I mean, I guess, as I said, Bruce came across a long time a long time ago, as did Greg. And,
Yes.
they've been pivotal. And I know there's
Yeah.
hundreds of other people, and it doesn't matter who you've connected with, but they have brought. But these guys for me have been, have always done it from a science base to try and get
Yes.
it into a greater understanding. And, obviously they're out more now because there is, this rise in consciousness and trying to get people to understand more and, really coming forth and not holding back. And I just love it because it just brings the proof that we've always not had because it's been not disclosed or hidden or vilified or whatever. So I think that's when we start questioning. And
Yeah.
I guess that would now go on to another conversation because you can talk for ages about, so what did it start questioning? What did you start seeing? What did you start feeling? When did you start thinking that this avatar body isn't all there has to be? There has to be something greater, that we are limitless people, that if we create our reality, wow, what can I create? If I can create this mess,
Yeah.
I must be able to
What else can I
create
do?
magic,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and that's what I guess I'm navigating to on a larger level now. Like if I can create, and I'm not saying people have been through horrific traumas and I'm not taking that away from them, but I'm also
Yeah.
going, okay, if I can sit in that and come through that, what can I create that is magical now that I really want? If I've chosen to come down on this earth plane, what was it I chose to come down and do? Like it's more of a, okay,
Yeah.
let's begin to create something and move through this not fitting in or not connecting for all these
Yeah.
years. Let's now connect and see what that means.
Yes. Yeah. And talking about that, it looks like, oh my gosh, I'll put my glasses on because then I can see how we have gone kind of over the time we normally go. But this has been now, yeah, this feels as if we are coming into our stride. Now, this is what I want to have conversations about. So let's continue this in our next podcast, because I think there's a point in our lives, and this is in everybody's lives, where we come to a point where we just start thinking there's got to be more to life than this. And I do,
Yeah.
because for me, like you, it came such a long time ago. I think that nobody else is thinking like that, because I don't think like that anymore. But It wasn't until I was talking to a young woman the other day, and she just said to me, "Oh God, this, life is such a struggle. There's got to be more of a reason why I'm here living this life." And I suddenly thought, "Oh shit!" I thought that I was yeah, I thought I keep thinking that everyone's on the same journey as I'm on, and that's not true. And I guess that's why we are lucky enough to be able to have conversations like this, and now in this time when we can actually put those conversations out and share them with other people.
Yeah, and what just came then, just the word depression came into my mind. Depression's such a big thing now, and many of us are a bit of on a roller coaster thinking, oh, it's depression of life or whatever. But what if it's just depression because we've just realized we've had this disconnect and coming back into this harmony? It's such
Yeah,
an easy word medicated for, but let's see that, perhaps the depression is more about because we don't know who we truly are, or we've lost that spark of us. So if we can begin to come back to that, I think we can have a greater understanding that if we're creating our reality, we can create it away from that. And it's not the situations we're being put in, maybe as a collective community that we've been made to, that perhaps we can change that. And then the depression and things that people just, every second person seems to have, but maybe it's if we can bring it back to more of a, away from the disconnect to the connect and a greater understanding
yeah.
that we
And
can
what
do
if,
things differently.
yeah, what if we could flip, what if we could flip it on our ear instead of, oh my God, I've, this is, it's almost like this is swallowing me up. It's holding me down. What if we could turn it around and go, well, this could be an opportunity?
Could
What
in
if it
its
was? What if we could look at it like that? So,
yeah.
you know, we can carry on this conversation in our next chat.
But I do want to say if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. And we're not under it, not saying that, but it's about navigating, having this awareness and navigating it now through that. So I
Yes,
think, I just wanted
yeah,
to say it isn't easy, but if we come together and have these discussions, you're not alone and we can
yeah.
find a way to move through it together.
And there are, yeah, and we just need to look out there. We just need to look at the statistics to know, yeah, it's not easy. But there is another side. There is a way to get through to the other side and to experience a lightness and a joy for life.
By keeping it simple, I go back to that. Let's just keep it
Yes.
simple because we overcomplicate and that's where we get lost even
Don't
further.
we? Yeah.
Let's just keep it simple and take a step forward just with a greater understanding and conversation. Yeah.
So true. And with that, we'll leave it there.